Hi. Um, woo, it's so hard to do this and talk to no one, but this is the STARS lesson for January, week number 2. This is going to be our second argumentative essay. You can't have a controversy unless you have a disagreement. So last week, we really worked on quoting credible expert sources. Kids struggled so much with that. I decided to kind of take a step back, and all I want you to do, no quotes, is go in and read the 2 articles provided and back up your points today. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen and share what was on the wipe-off board. Get my photo here. Okay, so in the classroom, this is what I had on the board. And I started the discussion with, where do we see people wear uniforms in real life? Is there a real life application? So I'm kind of doing this out of order a little bit, but kind of makes sense when we connect it with school uniforms. Police wear uniforms. And not every city wears the same color. So I don't know if you've noticed, different branches wear different colors. Firefighters. We need to be able to distinguish police and firefighter when an emergency arises. We need to know who we can seek out assistance with. I'm going to switch down to the military, and I had a lot of fun with this one, everybody, because hello. I don't think you want the U.S. Army or Navy, Air Force, Marines to have the same uniforms as, say, Russia, our enemy. And on the battlefield, that would be disaster, correct? And we know that we have friendly fire. Things happen in war, chaos ensues, and maybe you take out your own person, but those are, extenuating circumstances. You were in the same uniform, that's going to happen a lot more often. We want to be able to differentiate between a doctor and a nurse. Most of them wear scrubs. The doctor, of course, is going to wear the white jacket. I know my sister's a vet, and that's a ceremony they have when you become a doctor of medicine, whether it's veterinary medicine or people medicine. Sports, hey, come on. If everyone wore the same uniform, you'd be helping the opponent. Religious leaders, think about that. They wear uniforms as well. How do we know who the head of the church is? How do we know who the head in the temple is? If it's a shaved head, if it's, like the Pope, a pontiff hat. If it's a pastor, the white collar. The pilot of the plane. I want to know the difference between what the pilot wears and the stewardess wears, quite frankly. I want to know who's flying my plane. An instructor is going to be more polished. They're going to have a type of uniform. Businesses often wear suits. That's a type of uniform. Think about your world leaders. I mean, it's the suit and tie, and it's the $3,000 to $5,000 suit and tie. And then we're going to talk about, why do people wear uniforms in real life? Well, it's professional, for identification, and for safety. Okay. And those 3 are very important in the conclusion. And this is actually, this real life application, a great place to put that information is the conclusion. So 3 things I told you. It is professional, identification, and safety. And all of those apply with school uniforms as well. So our controversy today is, should kids wear school uniforms? Now, it's really interesting. You get to hear this lesson after I've already, gone over it with students. And those students who have never worn uniforms were very close-minded. And those students who had some sense of experience with uniforms were a little bit more open to it. I was really surprised by that. As a parent, I love them. They're fantastic. Recommend them highly. So what's the big deal? What's the argument? Okay, well, first and foremost, the biggest well, let's look at the history of uniforms. Who on earth came up with them? England. They can be dated back to 16th century England, and this is in your first page of your packet. So I hope you're following along with me with the link of the information. Here's what we find when we do an argumentative essay, everyone. Both sides have valid points. Okay. And you look at both sides of an argument before you make a decision. And what's really interesting about this argument is there are people who are very one-sided about it. Why do we have uniforms? Well, two reasons, basically. They began with private schools, snobby. They wanted to be differentiated. We don't want to look like the poor people. We want to differentiate ourselves. We want to look different and snazzy and ritzy. Okay. Same thing true today. You look at private schools, they take great pride. Every one of them in the Dallas-Fort Worth area has a different color scheme, different plaid, and they take great pride in their uniform. That hasn't changed. Private schools differentiate themselves in that way. There's only one in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that doesn't require uniforms, and that's Green Hill. Parochial schools, religious schools also differentiated themselves. They wanted to be pioneers in adopting the practice. So private and parochial. Parochial is just religious schools. They believed a standardized dress code. Standardized means everyone wears the same thing pretty much. It would instill a sense of discipline and equality among students. And this is dated back to 16th century England. So the private and parochial schools traditionally required students to wear a uniform to promote a sense of unity and pride within the school community. And I'm going to tell you, when my daughter wore uniforms, she was proud of it. She was proud of her plaid, and she was proud to represent her school. Uniforms also eliminate the pressure of keeping up with the latest fashion trends, reducing peer pressure and bullying based on clothing choices. Oh, that's a pretty good argument. You know, you look at what's going on specifically in Coppell and South Lake and Highland Park. How do kids differentiate themselves? Name brand clothing, name brand technology, footwear. And those who have the highest price tag, who wear the coolest stuff, are usually the most popular kids. And what do they do to the kids who can't afford that? Yeah. Well, they make it pretty clear you can't, keep up with our spending and the way we look. And they kind of set the trends too, as well. So private and parochial schools say when uniforms are put in place, I'm not saying it never happens, because I was really clear when I talked to my students in class, backpacks, jewelry, you can still find a way, if you're wealthy, to stand out. Your little mini handbags too. The shoes that they wear. My daughter had to wear saddle shoes, the awful blue and white saddle shoes, dressy shoes. But the truth is, uniforms do minimize this socioeconomic gap, this pressure to keep up with trends and brands and fads. And it's widely embraced. Numbers actually show 65%, of private schools in the US have some form of dress code or uniform policy. Now, there's a difference between a dress code. All schools have a dress code. Why? Because kids like to break the dress code. Yeah. I know Coppell doesn't allow crop tops. They don't allow short shorts. And I guarantee you, kids will try to wear it and try to get by with it. Let me just tell you, it happens with uniforms too. In my daughter's school, they had to be 2 inches above, could not be shorter than 2 inches above the knees, the plaid skirts, and the girls would roll them down the waist to make them shorter. Happens everywhere, but at least it sets a norm for what kids are supposed to wear. Most schools who implement or enforce uniforms argue it creates a sense of identity in a more professional environment. And I think that's a really strong argument given what it does in real life. Think about restaurants that have uniforms. Even a fast food restaurant, you can differentiate who the employee is. Really nice restaurants, you notice they're wearing really nice apparel and they look polished and they look professional. Um, so when did public schools even start thinking about, should we do uniforms too? Well, when discipline problems started to rise, when academic testing scores dropped, when attendance dropped, and gang violence. So there were behavioral issues that happened. So when this took place in the 1990s, public schools said, okay, wait, it works for private schools. Why don't we try it in a public school? So you'll notice charter schools, which are public school based, anybody can go to a charter school. They have implemented uniforms, and I think they want to make themselves look like they're more private, that they're a step above public. And most kids who are at these charter schools, at Universal Academy or North Hills Prep, have told me the environment is different. Let me just tell you, as a mom, my daughter went to a Christian school, K through 5, went to Coppell for 3 years for middle school, and then I took her out and put her in a private high school for high school. And I could walk on the campus, and there was a different feel. There was a different feel when I walked in the door to Coppell. And I stand by that. And I am a public school teacher. I have taught in the public school, and it is not today what it was 20 years ago. There are behavioral problems. There are incidences at school, disciplinary problems. And a lot of this is technology based. There's a reason for it. So what would Coppell do? What would they come up against if they tried to enforce uniforms? Well, the number one argument against them comes from parents. I want my kid to be able to express their personality and show their individuality and be comfortable wearing what they want to wear. Okay. And this is probably the number one argument. But even when principals implemented uniform policies at a public school, they found 64% of these principals said uniforms actually positively affected student achievement. What does that mean? Grades went up, right? Learning, the educational environment was conducive to learning. When you have discipline problems going on in the classroom, and I can tell you as a teacher, I had to stop teaching and handle the discipline problem. Everyone else in the classroom lost out on educational learning because I had to stop and discipline a student. School uniforms are believed to have a significant impact on discipline. Disciplinary issues are reduced. The school safety. Remember, I told you at the very beginning, 3 things that happen with uniforms in the real world, right? Safety. That was one of them. God, I just went blank. And I have my other one on the board right now. Safety, identification. What was the other one? Safety, identification. Let me look it up. Got my picture right here. Safety, identification, and they're professional. So if it's a more professional environment, wouldn't it be less discipline issues, less behavioral problems? Yeah. School uniforms can play a role in enhancing school safety in the sense that it creates a more positive learning environment, a safe environment. When all students are dressed in the same attire, think about this. If someone comes on campus who's an intruder or someone who doesn't belong on campus, well, they're going to be a lot more easily identified if there are uniforms. That's a really good point. Uniforms reduce distractions and conflicts that may arise because of differences in clothing styles or brands. And we kind of mentioned that before. This is socioeconomic discrimination. And by the way, this is not new. It happened when I was, your age, everybody. Uniforms can foster a sense of belonging and promote inclusivity because everyone's wearing the same thing. No one's wearing, Yeezys. No one's wearing Gucci or Prada. And most schools that enforce uniforms don't want that. When students are dressed alike, it really does become harder to distinguish those who come from affluent families and those who come from less privileged backgrounds or even poor kids. Um, it creates a more harmonious learning environment. It can't reduce them completely, as I told you before. There are other ways that wealthy kids can differentiate themselves. Another argument besides individuality, self-expression, is cost. I'm not going to lie, it does cost. I was lucky. In elementary, I think it cost me more because my daughter was still growing. So in high school, though, about 5 skirts, 5 blouses. She had the same pair of saddle shoes all 4 years because her foot never grew. We had to wear school sweatshirts. So that was kind of a cost, but her size didn't change. So over 4 years, we just kind of added to the mix there. But it does become expensive because you can't wear a jacket unless it has the school logo on it, right? And you go to these specialty uniform stores and they're not cheap, these uniforms, right? I will tell you this, on the other side of that, when my daughter went to Trinity Christian Academy, they had resale. They always had resale where students who outgrew, this was when my daughter was younger, they would resell uniforms at the end of the year. So there's a way to that especially parochial schools are really smart about, helping eliminate the huge cost, making it a little bit more palatable. But you think about what boys have to wear, right? And in my daughter's high school, this is horrible. I felt bad for the boys. Dress shoes, dress socks, slacks, a leather belt, a button down, a tie, and a sweater or jacket. I was like, oh no, poor guys, right? So that brings up another argument. That's a lot of money. Okay, we can all agree that's a lot of pieces and a lot of money. Okay, let's talk comfort for a second. You think about the number one way that kids dress today, especially since the pandemic, and that's athleisure. Most kids don't even wear jeans anymore. They wear sweatpants or joggers, shorts when it's warmer, and long t-shirts that barely cover the shorts. It's pretty comfortable. Um, and no, don't put in your argument that you can't go to physical education. Okay, and I can tell you at schools with uniforms, they have things to change into for PE. You don't have to wear your uniforms to work out. Okay, they have athletic clothes, and just like other schools do. But yeah, that's pretty constricting to have to wear that tie, right? Now, for my daughter, the girls, this is my only complaint. And we live in Texas, so we have a very short winter. But man, when it's cold, they couldn't wear leggings underneath their uniform plaid skirts, tights only. And even if it's fleece lined tights, that is cold, right? So that's kind of my only complaint there. But my daughter loved it. We just had this conversation. She's 25. I go, how do you feel about uniforms? She goes, loved it. Didn't have to think about what I was going to wear. Woke up, threw it on. Didn't have to put a lot of effort into it. And by the time you get to high school, trust me, you really do feel that way. Do uniforms restrict student self-expression? Of course it does. But let me just play devil's advocate here and say, sometimes what people wear to school, especially public school, causes a distraction in the classroom. When you wear uniforms, there's no distraction in the classroom. Fair? Yeah. So I've given you, like, the proponents and the opponents, kind of a bullet. That was really nice of me, right? Okay, so just to kind of give you the bullet points. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. We're going to go to the outline, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here. So your job is to make sure that you read the outline. Okay, so really interesting here. I'm noticing, especially kids that do it online, don't read this. So the first week, students were assigned the lead and the first body paragraph. I'm doing parts of the essay, and then the third week, we'll do the whole thing. This week, you are assigned body 2 and the conclusion. So I thought it'd be more fun, ladies and gentlemen, for you to argue against uniforms, because the consensus was kids didn't want them. So you'll notice the lead idea here, and even if you're not having to do it, I'm still going to explain it. Maybe talk about the history. Where did the idea of school uniforms come from? Well, private schools and religious schools adopted them to create a sense of unity and instill an environment of equality and discipline. The earliest documented findings show uniforms were introduced in 16th century England. So all of this was in your articles, by the way. Everything can be pulled in. When did public schools begin to consider implementing a uniform policy? When they saw a rise in problematic issues, a drop in academic performance, attendance problems, and an increase in gang violence, they decided to enforce uniform policies too. And it worked for the most part. Public schools who did implement uniforms reported promising results. Okay, you always put both sides, opposition and the opponent, and those who are for it, proponents. Those who favor school uniforms believe it can change the entire school atmosphere, impacting academics, behavior, and maintaining a safe environment. 100% agree with it. Those who oppose school uniforms claim other factors may be at play, which are causing problems to occur, and wearing the same clothes will not solve them. And I actually disagree with that. When it comes to the debate regarding whether or not school uniforms make a difference, there are reasonable arguments on both sides to support their beliefs. So I'm going to give you my side. Now, remember, this is just an outline. I have not written the whole thing. I would add more and I would explain more. 3 strong arguments prove school uniforms can be beneficial in both private and public schools. There are less distractions in the classroom. That's going to be my first point. Listen, your parents want you to go to school to get the best education possible. If uniforms allow you to have less distractions, higher learning is taking place. Secondly, when all students are dressed similarly, the environment appears to be more professional. There are fewer disciplinary problems. Guess what happens when there are no discipline problems? Teacher doesn't have to interrupt. Higher level learning takes place. More learning is taking place. Scores are raised, grades are higher, and kids are happier. Third, it's a safer environment. Okay, the above claims are valid arguments to support why wearing a school uniform makes sense. Okay, so from this point on is your part. Okay, those who oppose adopting school uniforms argue they are not as effectual as they should be. Okay, I'm actually going to tell you the argument right here. Okay, the first argument is going to be self-expression. That is the best argument. That is the number one argument that parents are going to argue. The second argument is going to be cost. Uniforms cost a lot. So I'm being really nice here. I'm giving it to you. The third argument here is comfort. Okay. Comfort. Find those in the article. Make a bold statement. You know, first of all, when kids are allowed to wear what they want, they can freely express their personality. Back it up. Second of all, it's a huge burden on parents who have to pay the cost of uniforms. Okay. And often this is in addition to private school, you know, expenses anyway. And third, when it comes to uniforms versus wearing whatever students want, it's much more comfortable to wear, you know, the fabrics that kids choose themselves. Okay, so the conclusion here, idea. Now remember, students cannot show their personality. I've kind of finished that for you. I did that for you. Whereas those who support adopting school uniforms believe in results in improved behavior, academic performance, and a safer environment. Those who oppose uniforms argue, this is what I just gave to you. Students cannot show their personality. They are uncomfortable and also expensive. And I think I just put that in the wrong order. So I'll switch that in here in a minute. Okay, my example below for the conclusion. Take this, kind of write your own spin on it. Think about how I started class. When it comes to deciding who's right, it depends on school policies for the most part. Private and religious schools promote a professional atmosphere and believes uniforms create a unified and inclusive environment for learning. In the real world, so you always want a real world application in the conclusion, this can be seen as well. Now, you don't have to use my examples here. Many occupations require uniforms, such as police, doctors, sports, and the military. You could choose 2. When they wear uniforms, it's a way for them to be easily identified. Remember, identification was one of the examples, the 3 things we did at the beginning. They also take pride in being part of an organization. I just saw a typo. Organization. This is also true for schools who enforce a uniform policy. There are several private and most public schools who want to allow students to be able to express themselves freely through their attire, but this has always been within limits. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, you don't get to wear what you want. There's a dress code, there's a uniform policy. You cannot go on a campus with purple hair, right? With Gothic clothes and distract everyone else. It's not going to happen. It must be said, being able to wear comfortable clothes has its merits. Cost-wise, whether a parent buys uniforms or play clothes, they end up spending the same amount. All in all, uniforms have their place, both in schools and in the real world. Okay. Okay. So your job is body paragraph number 2. Make sure, no quotes. You're going to read the 2 articles, and I can always tell when you don't, and back up the 3 arguments, which I'm so nice, I gave them to you. Self-expression, cost, and comfort. And all of that is explained in depth, right? Please don't copy the articles word for word. That's plagiarism and that's cheating. Make sure you're putting it in your own words, okay? And yes, that's happening a lot. That's okay. You're going to make mistakes. And remember, my classroom, there are no grades. Yes, you may get a lot of edits, but if I catch you, you don't make them at school when it counts. All right, this concludes lesson number 2. Thank you for watching, and please submit your essays as soon as possible. Have a great day.